Carpe Opticus. Today I'd like to talk to you about the DNT Optics ThermNight TNC225R multispectral optic. It's actually two optics in one. You've got your digital channel on top, which is going to include your daylight and your digital night vision, and then you've got your thermal channel right here. Now this is what I'd like to call an entry-level expert optic. What do I mean by that? Well, you can get it for $1,100 and it has a lot to offer for just $1,100. It has features that you find on much more expensive scopes. The expert aspect of it comes in because of the complexity of the scope. Now that is not to say that this is a scope that is too complex to use, but you're really running two scopes in one, and each of those scopes has different manners of operation and different advantages and shortcomings in the field, and you've got to learn to mitigate everything together in order to get the optimal performance out of the scope. Because you are running two different scopes, there are a lot of button pushes that are going to be used, and the button pushes don't always correspond with one another depending upon which optic that you're in. That's not to say this isn't learnable. It is absolutely learnable, and I think repetition in the field is the best way to learn how to use it. Usually when I get a new scope, I'll take it out in the field a couple times and use it as a handheld so I can get familiar with its operation before I ever mount it on a rifle. Now I said this was a complicated scope to use, and it is only in the sense that it has so many options and you can customize things in so many ways, but once you get everything where you like it, it's actually a fairly easy scope to run. It's just getting it to where you like it. It's going to take the most education, and that's going to take using the manual. The manual is well written and will tell you just about everything that you need to know. The things that I don't like about the manual are the fact that there is no table of contents and there's no index for it. So if you have a problem, you have to search through the manual to find the things that you need. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits and detractions of the scope itself and its physical capability. Some of the things that I really like about the scope are the fact that all the main controls for operating the menu system and how you customize the images in general all happen right in this area here over about 3 square inches. The only other controls are going to be the focus for the digital, thermal, and IR illuminator, which happens on the front, but you're probably not going to be messing with those nearly as much as you're messing with these. Then of course you have your ocular focus right here, which once you get that in focus you probably won't be touching it again. One of the things that I really like about this scope is that it has this little wheel right here. This little tiny wheel is the zoom wheel, and you can zoom in and out quite easily. This reminds me of the old Pulsar Apex scopes back from, 2013, 2014, that had a big zoom wheel on the side, and I thought that was absolutely a fantastic feature to have because it made zooming so easy. This does the same thing in that regard. You have the USB port on the side. You cannot charge the battery from the USB port, but you can download your videos and pictures from there if you'd like, or you can use the app. I did not spend much time using the app, so I won't comment on that. You have an accessory rail right here if you want to add another IR illuminator, and you may want to add another IR illuminator. In some circumstances I found, and you'll see in the video that's upcoming, sometimes the amount of reflected light, or what's called a photonic barrier, coming back to the unit from the ground is quite intense compared to the targets downrange. You'll see that in the video. It's still quite usable in this capacity and usable at long range. I'm very impressed with the IR illuminator and the digital channel of this scope working together. You can see animals at quite long distances and have them illuminated at quite long distances, and it works very well in that regard. But sometimes, especially with rough terrain or a lot of high vegetation, you get a lot of reflected light back into the scope. The focus on the digital channel works very well. It's got this nice tab right here. The focus on the thermal channel also works very well, but if you're right-handed like me, you're having to reach around the laser rangefinder and the IR illuminator to make adjustments to the thermal channel. I don't like that nearly as much. I tend not to touch the focus on the scopes very often unless I'm really trying to refine the image for some reason. Usually I set the focus at a distance I'm tending to shoot somewhere around 150 to 200 yards or so, sort of like an infinite focus. That means that things getting closer are going to be slightly out of focus, but for the most part everything is a very usable image and I'm not messing with it too much in the field. Some of the downsides of using this, before I get to the downsides, I also want to talk about the 18650 battery. The 18650 battery is a flat top. And it is mounted in such a way that when you unscrew the battery cap, the battery is already sticking out slightly and you can extract it quite easily. On a variety of scopes, the battery is flat fitting in here, and sometimes they're quite snug fit. And if you want to get the battery out of the scope, you're going to have to tilt the scope, and if your rifle is on a tripod, you're going to have to tilt the tripod or adjust it otherwise so that the battery will slide out. Same thing if it's a sideways mounted battery, you have to tilt it way over in order for the battery to come out. You don't have to do that on this scope because the battery already sticks out slightly and is covered by the battery cap. The one thing I don't like about this battery cap, and this is something that's happened to me previously in the field with another Optic, if you drop the battery cap in high weeds in the field when you're trying to make a battery change, that's gone. You're not going to find it quickly. Certainly you're not going to find it if you're on hogs at the time and you're turning on your white light searching the grass looking for it. I'd like to see a lanyard on this. It doesn't have a lanyard, but one thing that it does do very well, as most of the screw type battery caps do, it stays in place very well and will not pop up under recoil like some of the snap battery caps do on some other units. Overall, I like this scope a whole lot. There's nothing about it in and of itself that I see as being a reason to not buy it if you're interested in an Optic with these sorts of capabilities. Everything works and works fairly well. I can't stress that enough. It is complicated, as I've said, and you do have a problem with touching these buttons if you're wearing gloves and being able to feel them when you're wearing gloves, but you've got a nice blue light here that lets you know where the control panel is, and you can index off that light in order to find the buttons more easily if you need to do that. Now, one of the other things that bothers me about this scope, and this is a minor issue, is that the digital channel does not come with a lens cap, and this is going to be the channel where you're doing most of your long-range identifications from. You may be doing most of your shooting from this channel as well. The thermal channel does come with a lens cap, but it's on a kind of floppy lanyard, and if you don't tuck it away somewhere underneath the scope, it will end up flopping in front of your view while firing sometimes. I saw that on OG's Danger Show, which is another YouTube channel. You might want to check it out. He has a nice review of the scope as well. Now, one of the other detractions from the scope is that it does not come with any QD or return to zero type mounts. It has bolt-on mount only. This mount does work very well. You just don't have the convenience of the other types of mounts. Now, I'm not going to go through the ergonomics of running the scope of what happens with the menu system and what all these buttons do individually. For example, this one button has 13 different functions depending upon where you are in the operation of the scope. However, that has been covered by many other channels, and there have been a lot of these units out for review, and they've covered it much better than I would cover it myself. What I'm going to focus on are going to be the capabilities of what the scope can do in the field, and that's what the rest of the video is going to be focused on. One of the things I like about this Optic is the number of views that you have. There's about 6 in total. Here we're using the single mode with picture-in-picture, so you can have picture-in-picture or not, so that's going to be 2 different views. And as you zoom in, you can see there isn't very much pixelation even at the fullest zoom. That's not unexpected given the 1920 resolution. It's a nice image overall for the digital channel. Same thing with thermal. You can do it with picture-in-picture or without picture-in-picture, so that's going to be 2 more views. And I have this muted. I'm going to go ahead and let the audio play. It's quite loud. I've got an engine going. There's a lot of wind noise, but you can look at the amount of pixelation that occurs during zoom, and also the fact that the audio will drop out whenever I press a button. Here you can see with the 256 resolution, it does become quite pixelated when zoomed in. Not unusable, but quite pixelated, and maybe unusable for small animals at a distance. The last 2 of the 6 views are in the dual mode, where you've got digital in one picture and you've got thermal in the other. Here on the big screen you've got thermal, on the small screen you've got the digital image. As I change the color palettes on the thermal in the main image. Pretty cool. This is just a brief view of the thermal before I clicked over to digital night vision. With no IR illuminator, with hogs at about 225 yards, I've got thermal, of course, up in the upper right hand corner. And once I turn on the IR illuminator, you can see the hogs on the digital channel. On this night we were a day or two out from a full moon, and you can see the hogs fairly well even though they're out there at about 325 yards. You can see the laser rangefinder ranging the hogs, and then I turn on the IR illuminator and you get some overly illuminated foreground in the process. On this night there is no moon, there's starlight, but there are no clouds, and you can't see squat of the cattle in front of me on the digital channel. You can see them fine on thermal. And then once the IR illuminator comes on, presto, you can see cows. In this segment you've got a 165-pound hog out there at about 380 yards, and it's a little bit harder to see because of the overly illuminated foreground. It's way too bright, but you can see the hog, and if I would have zoomed in, I could have taken a shot at that hog. Now this is an accelerated view of the hog coming in. I am going to be lasing it with the laser rangefinder from another rifle. As he comes in, he's going to come into about 250 yards, and that's where I'm going to drop him. Alright. Little more. And boom, he's down. So we can eliminate the cattle way the heck out there at 500 yards. Alright, well this doesn't suck at all. This is not a coyote cannon, this is the onboard illuminator. And let's see if I can range way out there. That's going to be 1,000 yards. Let's see. Trees there are 824 yards, and the cattle are beyond the trees, so we could call the cattle probably at 1,000 yards or more than the ones above the crosshairs. That's pretty impressive. Closer cattle, 562. So now this is all under a full moon, of course. So I can see cattle way out in the distance, and the tree line says it's 933 yards, so they're over, I'd say they're probably close to 900 yards at least. Alright, pretty cool. Now here's an example of where the foreground is way over illuminated. I'm going to mitigate that problem by focusing the beam of the IR illuminator somewhat. And as you can see, the picture quality will improve as most of the beam, or more of the beam, is projected downrange instead of to the foreground. I didn't do much work with small critters, but that's a skunk there in the distance. And I had trouble getting an exact range on it, in part because it is so small, so I'm ranging probably the things around it more so than the skunk itself. What I need to do at this point is to zoom in. And once I zoom in, I need to focus a little better. That's pretty cool. I could be shooting a skunk at 180 yards. Alright, just to recap with the likes and dislikes, some of the major likes I have of this scope. First of all is functionality. Everything works and works pretty much as designed on this scope. I didn't have any glitches with the system. I didn't have it lock up at any point in time. Everything worked very nicely. Price point, $1,100. Gotta like it. The electronic controls are all in the same area. That means they're easy to access and easy to control. I like that a lot. It's a very versatile scope. You can do the digital day version. You can do digital night vision. You can do thermal. You've got an IR illuminator, laser rangefinder, ballistic compensator, and it also records. You can toggle between views. This is so cool, being able to go back and forth between the digital view and the thermal view. I like that a lot. And I usually use the thermal view for scanning, and then I will shoot on the digital night vision view. And you have multiple views. I demonstrated 6 in the video. Pretty nifty. And I absolutely love the zoom wheel. I also like the fact that for this price point you've got long range capability, which is really great, especially for digital night vision, which back in 2013, 2012, thereabouts, shooting over 100 yards was something of an accomplishment. The ballistic compensator works well. I took it to the range, zeroed at 100 yards, moved to 300. Was within 1 MOA, actually was 2 inches off at 300 yards. That's not too shabby. I like the compact design. The laser rangefinder functionality works very well. It certainly works better than some other scopes I've used. It's not perfect. Sometimes at long distances you still have to lay things that are next to the animal instead of the animal itself, but you do what you can. Battery access, no scope tilting involved in order to get the batteries out. For me, there are no red flags on this scope for not buying it, unless of course you want something with different amounts of resolution. I don't have many major dislikes of this scope, but there are a few. The buttons on the main control panel are just too close together, and they're too small and indistinct to be felt if you're using gloves, and it could be easy to press the wrong button. I don't like that. This is a more complicated scope to use than most others. That's simply because it does so many things. It's not really a fault of the scope, it's just a fact of life. If you're doing that many things, you're going to have a steeper learning curve. The laser rangefinder numbers are far too small. They're too hard to see. I don't like that. And the IR illuminator appears to be aimed too low. It may not actually be aimed too low, but you get a lot of light reflected back to you if you're at ground level. As for the minor dislikes, there are a few. I don't like the thermal focus access. If you're right-handed like me, you have to reach around the laser rangefinder and IR illuminator in order to access the focus ring, and that's a little more difficult to do than I would like. There's no lens cap for the digital channel. I think there should be a lens cap since that is the most important channel. I don't like the floppy lens cap for the thermal channel. It works, but you got to tuck it out of the way. There's no lanyard for the battery cap. People like me are going to lose them. There are the audio dropouts, which happen with the button presses. That's a minor annoyance. Also, the audio only comes in the left channel. I don't like that. And the mounting system, while it is quite solid and works very well, it's not a quick detach mount or a return to zero mount. I hope those will come along in the future. As it is, it works very well, but it doesn't have the versatility that the other mounts would have. I would also suggest that you check out the other reviews on this scope. Other reviewers will have different likes and dislikes than I do. I'm just sorry that I don't get to spend more time with this scope. I was only given a month with this scope, and I'm going on nearly 2 months, and so I've got to get this in a box and shipped off tomorrow. Now, I thought this was an apropos clip to end the video. I've got the hogs out there at about 265 yards. I've got a low battery, and when I shift over to the digital night vision with the IR illuminator, it's going to put more drain on the battery, and it's going to give me a warning saying there's only 20% left, and it's going to shut off in order to protect the battery to keep it from being drawn down too far. And it's actually going to record the shutting down of the scope. Carpe sus, my friends.